Good evening, listeners. This is Through the Night YouTube, a place where your nightmares become reality. These are 5 allegedly true encounters with humanoid creatures. Humanoid in Ohio by MUFON. This event happened in Mount Vernon, Ohio. If you know anything about the Mount Vernon area, you'll know it's located in a rural part of Ohio. Most of Mount Vernon is covered in countryside, and the largest city is about 40 miles away. One July night around 1:40 a.m. in 2018, I was driving home on Ohio State Route 13, north of Mount Vernon. As I was rounding a corner, a 7 to 8 foot tall, skinny humanoid-like creature ran across the road out of a cornfield and crossed into a soybean field from the east to the west direction. I noticed the creature in my headlights from 50 to 75 feet away as I was traveling at around 55 miles per hour. As it came out of the cornfield, I immediately let off the accelerator. At first I was thinking it was a deer, but then seeing the creature walked upright. It was 7 foot in height, tall, slender body, arms and legs small in diameter, and the hands and feet looked oversized for its body's proportion. It had a small neck with an oval, elongated head, being dark tan to light brown skin, and had no body hair whatsoever. The creature slightly turned its head towards the vehicle, and I seen the creature's black eyes and small mouth just open slightly as it continued to run across the road. The mouth was just a straight slit, almost stretching from one ear to the other. It barely took 2 to 3 steps and it was across the entire duration of the road at an incredible rate of speed. I was in total shock and thought I should check it out at first, but then thought for a second and began being uncertain of what I may have just seen. I decided I had better get out of the area. I lost sight of the entity due to the darkness. Now, I'm a 24-year-old United States Air Force retired aircrew veteran with a top secret security clearance, and I've never seen anything like that. This thing looked as if it would have torn a bodybuilder to pieces. That's when I decided that I don't want an encounter with another one of these creatures. The Rake by Jordan DeVries. I always heard my friends talk about this creature, this thing that was out in the woods. I used to tell them that they were crazy for believing in that sort of stuff. But it wasn't until 2 days ago, my best friend and I went camping out in those very woods that our friends believed it lived. The night before, I stayed at my best friend Jacob's house, so we could pack and get everything ready to go into the woods for our camping trip. It wasn't until we started packing I had realized that Jacob hadn't mentioned anything about the creature in the woods, which is completely abnormal. We just carried on a normal conversation just like 2 normal teenagers would. I didn't question it at all because of course I didn't want to hear anything about it. After we got done packing, Jacob turns to me and says, "We're going to be okay out there tonight, right?" I find this question to be a little creepy, so all I managed to say is, "Don't worry, Jake. Everything's gonna be fine." Since Jake's house is right in front of the forest, we just walked down a dirt road to our private campsite. Jacob is riding his bike, so he's just a few yards in front of me, when all of a sudden I hear footsteps behind me. But they didn't sound right. They didn't sound human, nor did they sound like an animal. I look back, only to see nothing there. Jake immediately stops his bike when he doesn't hear me following him. He turns back at me. The expression on his face told me that he wanted to tell me, "Come on, dude, what are you just doing standing there? Let's go." But obviously he says nothing, and I say nothing, and we both carry on. Later that night, around 9 p.m., just 2 hours after we got to the campsite and finished setting up, I'm fishing to get our dinner, while Jake is trying to start a campfire. Everything was normal until I heard Jake. He was screaming. I quickly run over to make sure he's okay, but what I came to was something worse. I see Jake pointing up at the tree. I look up and I see this creature. It's staring down at us with its piercing white glowing eyes. It was nowhere near a human. This thing looked like a slender man, its arms abnormally long, its legs skinny and bony, almost transparent, and they were all inverted. Just something seemed wrong about it. It was crouched down in a tree, probably 30 or 40 yards away from us, in something like a bridge position. It was peering from behind the tree like it didn't want to be seen, and it was shocked that we saw it. This is the creature that all my friends were talking about. Jake looks up at me and silently mouths, "We run on 3. 1, 2, 3. At this point, we leave everything we had brought with us, except for a flashlight. Jake is in front of me. I have the flashlight in my right hand, trying to keep the light steady so Jacob can see. As we're running, I become curious, like anybody else would, so I turn the flashlight behind me to look back and see the creature. It just jumped out of the tree, and it looks like it's pursuing us now. At this point, we ran past his house, so I yelled at Jake, who was about 30 feet in front of me, "Jake, go left. We gotta get back to your house." I see Jake turn left, and we begin running through this field coming up to Jake's house. We're both hoping that Jake's mom did what we told her to do and left the back door unlocked, just in case we decided to come home early. Finally, after what seems like forever, we made it to the house. Jake and I run to the back door, hoping it's unlocked. We make it to the door, Jake turns the knob. He looks back at me and says, "It's locked." I stare at Jake for what seems like forever, which was probably more like 15 seconds, then look back at the field. I don't see anything. It isn't following us anymore. At this point, it's about 12 a.m. now, and we just stay at the back door, afraid to look towards the field and afraid to try to sneak around the right side of the house to get to the front door. Again, for what seems like forever, but was probably more like an hour and a half, we stay at the back door, just surveying the area, making sure it wasn't still following us. Finally, I look at Jake and tell him, "Why don't we just go to the front of the house and ring the doorbell? Your mom might still be awake and she'll let us inside." Jake just nods, still too terrified to talk. We make it into the front of the house, and I ring the doorbell, and to my surprise, Jake's mom opens the door. She's still wide awake. She asks us why we came back before daybreak, and I simply say, we couldn't catch any fish for our dinner. We continue the conversation a little bit after that, revealing nothing about what we had just witnessed. Since Jake was still obviously terrified and aghast at what he just saw, he slept in his mom's room. I slept in Jake's room. It's around 4 a.m. and I still can't sleep, so I went over to Jake's computer and logged on. After only a few minutes of research, I found out what I think the creature is. It was a rake. Just a Glimpse by A.J. Capel. It was an evening night in May, and the night before it had rained throughout the entire day, so this night wasn't too humid, but wasn't exactly dry either. It was the perfect sort of night to get out of the house. I was out for a drive with two of my friends. We'll call them Ben, who was 21, and Mary, who was 18 at the time. We were driving down a fairly straight patch of road that is pretty hilly, somewhere in the backwoods of Hollinsburg, Ohio, just northwest and outside of the Dayton area. As we approached a section of woods, my friend Ben commented on how it would be hard to avoid hitting a deer or anything else while driving through this patch of road, so I should let him know if I see anything. Now, in this area it's common to see deer on the side of the road, so it isn't unusual to keep an eye out for wildlife. As we were nearing the end of this patch of woods, we saw something that looked gray in color with a hint of pink, almost like a malnourished human, dart out in front of us and run into the woods across the road. This creature was larger than a deer, hunched over on all fours, had a light pink grayish color, almost as if it was naked, and it was incredibly fast. You could tell that it had long limbs, almost too long. Its arms and legs almost looked twice the length that they should have been. We only saw it for a few seconds before it was gone, just over the road and into the woods. We may not have even noticed it if we weren't looking for something. I have no clue what it was, but it had no apparent face, and it looked formidable. Like something that you had seen close up, you'd have never wanted to see it again. This humanoid creature, whatever it was, terrified us, and now, since that day, we've avoided taking that route completely. It Ran Alongside Us by SPR Dave 70. One night, my wife and I were driving up through northern Arizona on Highway 89, just between Flagstaff and Page. It was about 1 a.m. as we were on third shift at the time, and I often drove at night to avoid traffic. A few miles down the road, I saw a set of eyes glowing in my headlights a little way up on the road, so I let off the gas, slowing down to avoid hitting an animal in the road. When we drove by, we saw several dogs, which looked to be coyotes, on the side of the road, and I hit the gas and drove by as quickly as possible. After we passed, my wife said one of them was running next to the car, and I looked over and sure enough, saw it as well. It was probably 20 feet off the shoulder of the road, in a field, keeping pace with us. At this point, I floored it and looked over, and it stood up on its hind legs. That's the only way I can describe it, and kept pace with us for another couple seconds before turning away from the road and disappearing into the trees. This thing looked like a dog, but stood up on its back legs to run faster, alongside the vehicle, just to keep pace with us. This whole event probably lasted no more than 10 seconds, but it was seriously the most terrifying 10 seconds of my life. This was probably 20 years ago, and we still rarely talk about it. The Rake Lives in My House by Para8. Let me start off by saying that all these events are true, and they actually happened to me. Now, my house has always been creepy. Growing up, I found unexplained experiences starting from the time I was 4 and never stopping. I live in rural Kentucky, one of those towns that solely rely on coal and is 5 years behind the rest of the world. In general, the whole town is still covered in thick woods that appear to have not been tampered with for hundreds of years. My house is placed right in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by an extreme amount of woods and even a couple of ponds. That gives you the setting for my home. This is where the real story begins. Growing up, I was never allowed to watch those shows such as Ghost Hunters or even movies such as The Exorcist in my house because of the weird activity which goes on here. I know, odd. However, I'd experienced it from an extremely young age, and my mom, who has lived in this house for her whole life, had also. However, one night my family made an exception, and we all watched a documentary about Waverly Hills together. At that age, I still slept in the room with my mom due to me being afraid of sleeping in this house alone. That night, I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the feeling that something was watching me. I felt extremely uneasy. I think we all know that feeling. I rolled over to look around the room and my eyes locked onto something standing beside my mom. It was extremely tall, but looked as if it had a broken back and couldn't stand up completely, almost hunched over. It was slouched over and had extremely pale skin and bones sticking out underneath the skin everywhere due to how skinny it was. It had long claws hanging from both hands. Its face was sunken in and eyes were completely black holes, just black holes. A few greasy hairs were visible on its head, and it had no clothes on, but no genitals or nipples. I was completely horrified. Not saying anything, I rolled over and covered myself up head to toe with the cover. I refused to move or look out the rest of the night, even though I was completely wide awake. Eventually, my mom finally woke up that morning. She immediately started complaining of her side hurting. She raised her shirt to look and found huge claw marks down her side. It was 3 deep wounds which were extremely inflamed and still bleeding. I felt horrible knowing that thing did that to her while I lay beside her, hidden. A couple of months later I saw that creature again, although not as horrible as the first experience. I was woken up to the creature slouched on the floor on my side of the bed. It was watching me sleep. As I lay there, eyes wide awake, watching this creature, I could see the chest slowly moving up and down as it breathed. I was terrified. I slowly covered myself up again, acting as if I had not seen it, only this time I built the courage to peek out and found it still looking at me. I'm not sure when it went away because I didn't dare look again. This feeling that the creature gave me while being in my room was horrifying. I got chills and my hair stood on end before even seeing it the first time. It had the feeling of complete evil to it. I'm 18 now and obviously sleep in my own room now. However, I still live in the same house. My mom still sleeps in the room where I witnessed this creature. Almost nightly, she has nightmares about something watching her in her room. She has nightmares about something hiding in the paintings on her walls or something coming from the ceiling in her room while she sleeps. There's one specific corner of the room where almost every dream seems to originate from. Our cat also refuses to stay in that room if the door is shut. Sometimes we see and witness things that we shouldn't, or things that we aren't meant to. Sometimes these things know that we have seen them, and next time, they might just be waiting for you to walk out of your door at night, or for you to get into your vehicle in the dark. Good night. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this narration. This is my first video, so I would appreciate any support that you can give. A subscribe and a share would be greatly appreciated. Please leave your constructive feedback in the comments. Additionally, I could use stories to narrate, so if you have any sort of scary, creepy, or unusual encounter, please feel free to email them to ThroughTheNightYT@yahoo.com. Thank you for listening, and good night.